Hola, ¿cómo están?
Hola a todos, ¿cómo andan?
Hola, buena tarde. Saludos para todos. Buena tarde. Gusto. Nuevamente otra sesión rumbo a la
Hello, everybody. Here we
PH4H.
are in the
Tengo a
next session
varios
on our way to
colegas
the PH4H.
conocidos por aquí, entonces
We have
vamos
several well-known
un
colleagues
minutito
here,
más
so we're going to wait just
para
one
todos
more minute
los de pronto colegas que se están uniendo
to make sure that everybody can join
y
us.
empezamos ya con
We will
Alejandro. ¿Está
start
listo
with
nuestro speaker?
Alejandro, who is
Vamos
going
a
to
darle
be
un
our
minutito y
speaker today.
empezamos.
So just one more minute and we will get started.
Bueno, nuevamente buena tarde a todos. Un
Okay,
gusto
so once
que
again,
estén
thank
por
you,
aquí.
everybody. It's a pleasure
Seguimos
to have
con
you all
nuestras
here.
sesiones
We continue then with
preparativas
our
para
sessions in
la
preparation
Conectaton
for the
eh,
Connectathon,
del, del Salvador este año
which
en
will be in
octubre
El Salvador in
2025.
October
Estaremos haciendo
2025.
nuestra cuarta Conectaton ya.
This will be our
Y
fourth
estamos
Connectathon,
también retomando los temas de
and
terminología.
we are
De
also
esa manera,
catching up on the topics related to
voy
terminology.
a tener nuestro
So
primer webinar
today
relacionado
it's going
con
to be
el
our
subtrack
first
de
webinar related to
terminología.
the
Entonces, para
terminology
eso nos
subtrack.
acompaña
So
eh,
for this,
Alejandro López
we
Osorno,
have
muy
with
conocido por
us
varios de
Alejandro
ustedes. Para
Lopez
quienes no lo
Osorno,
conocen, Alejandro
well
es
known by
especialista
several
en
of you. He's a
terminología
specialist
y
in
bueno, es parte
terminology,
del
and
equipo
he
de
is
SNOMED
also
y hoy
a
vamos a
part of
tener,
the SNOMED team.
Alejandro nos va a
And
acompañar
Alejandro will
en el
be with
subtrack
us today
terminológico de la Conectaton
in this
y hoy vamos a
Connectathon
tener el primer
subtrack,
webinar
and we're going to
que
have then our
nos va a
first
indicar
webinar,
los
who
alcances de
will
este subtrack. Así que Alejandro, muchas gracias
tell
por
us
estar con
the
nosotros
details
y
about these
adelante con
subtracks. So Alejandro,
tu
thank you
webinar
so
de hoy.
much for being with us today,
Bueno,
and
muchas gracias
please, you
Fernando.
can go ahead
Un
and deliver your
saludo.
presentation.
Gracias por la invitación y bueno, como
Well, thank you
siempre,
so
un
much for
placer.
having
Espero este
invited
año
me,
poder
and it's
estar.
always a pleasure. I
El año
hope that
pasado
this year
justo
I will
coincidía
be able
la
to attend.
Conectación con el mes
Last
de
year,
Snowmed,
the
pero esta
Connectathon
vez
was
coincidimos
held
una de
in
la otra.
Este
parallel
año
to the
tienes que estar.
SNOMED
Este año no tenemos que visitar
meetings, so I
Vienes
hope
sin
that I
excusa.
can
Sí.
attend this
Eso.
year.
No,
You
tengo
have
muchas ganas, la verdad que
no
vi todo lo que hicieron y
excuses.
la verdad que estuvo buenísimo el año
It
pasado,
was
así que me
actually
perdí.
very great
Así que
from
vamos a
what I
ver.
heard. I missed it, but
Un poco lo que
I
vamos a
do
ver
hope
es
that we will see
el
you
aspecto
this year.
terminológico de las
So let's
activaciones que
look
ustedes
at
van a hacer
the
desde el lado del
terminology of
país
some of the
durante la
activities that you will
Conectathon.
be
Vamos a ir a
doing
ver un poquito
from your
repasando todo
country
eso.
node. So we're going to be checking
El
several of
objetivo
these
es usar
things.
la
Now,
API
the
Fire
objective
terminología.
is to
Ustedes
use
durante la
the
Conectathon, las pruebas que van a
Fire
hacer,
API.
usar
You will be
Fire
using
para
the
intercambiar documentos
Fire
electrónicos,
APIs to
pero
exchange
una parte de ese
electronic
intercambio de
documents,
documentos
but
electrónicos
part of
implica
that exchange also
que esos documentos tengan
implies
los códigos
that those
correspondientes,
documents
¿verdad?
have the right
Y
codes.
utilizar las API Fire de
And
terminología es la mejor
using the
práctica
Fire
para que
Terminology
ustedes,
API is
previo
the
a
best
enviar el
practice
documento,
so that
puedan
prior
rellenar el
to
documento con
sending the
los
documents,
códigos
you
correspondientes.
can check
Ya
it
sea
with
porque
the
ustedes tienen
corresponding
códigos
code,
usen
whether it
directamente, códigos
is
nativos que
because
utilizan
you're using
en,
native codes that are
en la
being
demo, en la
used
Conectathon,
in the
porque tienen que mapear
Connectathon
sus
demo,
códigos
or
propios a los
because you
códigos de
have
la
to map
Conectathon.
from code
Eso
of
es un
your
poco
own.
lo que vamos a contarles
So what we're
cómo
going to be sharing
pensamos
with you
que
today
podría funcionar
is
todo esto y cómo
how
lo
we
hicimos el
believe
año
that
pasado.
this can
Y
work
lo vamos a
just as we did
acompañar a lo
last
largo del
year,
proceso para que ustedes
and
puedan
we're
tener una
going
implementación de un
to
servidor terminología
be
en Fire,
helping
porque
you
van a
so
ser
that you
parte
can
de un nodo de país que
determine
ustedes
this in
van a tener.
Fire, part of the nodes that you're going to have
Entonces, en
in each of your
realidad,
countries. So
lo que pasa es que What actually
Perfecto,
happens
tenés
then
que
is that
electrónica
when you
y
have the
un
electronic
equipo
health
estándar que
record
comparten, ya
and
sea
a
el
standard
equipo
of
de
which is
IPS
being
o
shared,
equipo
whether
Coca-Cola,
it's the
y ahí
IPS
lo que hace la instalación
or
de información
FIRE
que
or
está dentro de la
DDCV,
clínica
what you do is
electrónica
that you
es
translate the
formatearlo en formato
information in the
correcto,
electronic
usar los
record,
códigos que
you
corresponden, usar
reformat
los
it,
que
you
se
use the
diferenciaron y
corresponding codes
enviarlo.
using the
Y
standardized
de la misma manera,
terminology, and
cuando
then
lo
you can send it.
reciben
And also,
información
when they
estandarizada,
receive
reciben
it, they get a
códigos
standard
y ellos
terminology,
tienen
they
que
get
transformar
codes,
esos códigos
and
que
they need to
usan esa historia
transform
clínica
that
que
into
suelen
the
utilizar
codes
esa
that you have
información.
in your medical
Esa
records if you want to use
interoperabilidad
that information.
es
So
interacción y compartir
interoperability is
información
this
y que del otro
action
lado
of
se pueda
sharing
utilizar tal como si
information
se hubiera
so that
registrado
on the other end
registros
it can be used just as if it had
compartir
been,
IPS no es
just as it would
simplemente
have been
voz
done in
objetivo,
the
voz base,
original end.
donde el que
So
lo
that's
recibe
a
lo puede
very
mirar
basic
y puede
interoperability so
informarse
that
sobre lo que
people
pasó.
can
De
actually
vuelta
look
al
at it, they
principio de
can
la
get informed
interoperabilidad.
of that
La verdadera
information
interoperabilidad y
that's
los
there.
verdaderos
But
beneficios
real
vienen cuando
information,
yo
real
los datos que recibo
interoperability comes
los
when
puedo
you
mezclar
get
con mis
the
datos
data and you
y con
can blend
cuentan
and
los datos
mix that
recibidos. Hubiera
with
podido
the data
mezclar como
that
si
you
los hubiera
already have
registrado
in
yo.
your corresponding
Y esto
codes.
sirve, por ejemplo, si yo
And
estoy viendo
this is, for
recibo un
example,
IPS con un área
if I
específica
get an IPS
y
with
luego
an
voy a hacer una
allergy,
prescripción en mi
and then
sistema,
I'm
el
going to make a
paciente
prescription in
resulta que es
my
alérgico
system,
al o fue
and
declarado un
the
IPS, la alerta que sale en
patient
mi sistema
has an
automáticamente
allergy
envía
to
una
something that
alergia
is
y esto
declared
casi
in the
igual
IPS,
que si la
that
alergia viene de un
alert
IPS
should
y se asocia a la
also
canción.
be
Eso
triggered,
es considerado
as if I
consideración
had
básica.
put together
En
the
general, cuando uno
original
importa
health
estos
record. When you
recursos
import
estandarizados en
these
interoperabilidad, uno tiene una
standardized
etapa en la cual uno
resources
prueba
in
los equipos que
interoperability,
se
there's a
reciban, ¿no?
stage where you
Objetivamente
approve
todos los
something.
datos
I mean,
que
it's
estén
not
guardados en el
automatic
sistema
that
interoperable.
everything that is
Pero
sent
en
is
general hay una
saved
pantalla
in the
donde, por ejemplo,
EHR,
uno
but
me
there's a
llegó
screen
y
where you
dice,
can
esto
see a
sí, sí, sí,
summary
sí, plum,
and
y
you
todo
can
eso va a
say,
nuestro equipo
these
y se
ones
va
are okay,
codificado.
and you click
No
them
tengo
all.
que volver
So
a
it's all
escribir cosas.
pre-coded. You don't
Es
need
decir,
to
yo tengo un
rewrite
paciente que
that.
yo nunca vi,
So if it's a
recibo
patient that
datos
we've never
de
seen
otro
before,
sistema a través
we
del
get the
sistema de
data from
interoperabilidad,
a
que después
different
usa FIRE con
system, but
todo.
with
Yo
fire
tendría como una
interoperability
precarga de lo que el
resources,
paciente
then we
tenía.
have like a
Y yo en esto,
preload of
en
what the
tiempo
patient
largo,
has.
buscando todo el paciente en
So
detalle,
instead of
utilizo esa
asking
precarga para generar un
the
registro de equipo
patient
muy
for all of
rápido
those,
y luego
those
puedo preguntarle más
details,
detalle de
I
algo,
can upload
confirmar
that, and
algo,
then we can ask some additional
de lo que
information or
aprendí.
confirm
Pero me
uh,
beneficio de esta intercambio de
additional
información.
things. That's one of the benefits of
Entonces esto
this
implica que yo
information
tengo que
exchange,
enviar
which
códigos que los
means
otros
that we need to
entiendan, porque si no
send
les sirvan,
code that
y lo que
they
dice la
understand,
flecha de
that
arriba,
they are
cuando recibo
helpful,
tengo que
and
convertir
when
los
we
códigos que vi en el
receive
código que a
them,
mí me
that
sirve.
those codes have got to be translated into the codes
Esto
that
puede ser que
we
yo
use. So
tengo
it
un
could be
vocabulario local,
that
pero
we have a
necesariamente tengo
local
que decir en qué
vocabulary,
entiendo
but the
versión
standard
en
asked me to
ICD. O
send it
tengo un
in
vocabulario local que está en
ICD
ICD Snow, pero la
11
traducción
or
termina otra.
into SNOMED
O yo
CT.
tengo SNOMED,
Or
pero tengo
we
SNOMED del
have
país.
SNOMED, but it's the
Se llama
country
SNOMED versión
SNOMED,
uruguaya.
and for
Versión
example, the
argentina, o
Uruguay
versión chilena,
version, and
son
we
como
want to send that
nombrados.
to Argentina. There's a new version, the
Eso de
Chilean one
compartir que
also.
asegurarme de que el código que
We
mando
need
sea
to
un
make
código del país
sure that
específico
the
de
code is not the
internacional, si no
country
después no
code, but
entiendo y
is the
vuelvo a otro.
international code.
O lo que puede ser es que yo
Or
reciba lo que
also
reciba
we
y de
can receive
posteriores lo
whatever we
importe al
receive,
mapeo local.
and we
O
have to
si
share
me
that with
aparece
the
un código
local
nuevo, lo puedo
mapping,
validar
or
para
if
ver si
we
es un
get the
código válido
STOME code to
o lo
see
puedo
whether it's a
cambiar de
valid
versión, por
one,
ejemplo, una
or
versión que
we
sea
can
distinta a la
change
versión
the
anterior.
version because that's
Estas
the
cosas las
version that
puedo
we're
hacer
using.
utilizando un servidor
All of
como
these things,
DHCP
they can be
y un
used
poco de
by
sistema.
using the
Los
terminology that we're
componentes
going
de
to be
nodo de
looking at
país que
today.
están
The
implementados,
country
que
node
ya
components that
nosotros
you're
en la práctica
implemented,
clínica ya vieron,
which is another
son
presentation that you've
distintos
probably gone
niveles.
through
Uno es el
already,
servidor
have
happy
different
que
levels.
trae
One
el
is the
middleware de
happy
IPS,
server.
hay un
We have the
middleware que es el
IPS
equipo de
middleware.
vacunas,
There's a specific
hay un emisor que
vaccination
es el PAF,
middleware.
y el
There's an
otro componente que
IPS
me toca
viewer from
revisar hoy
LackPath.
es el
And the other
Snowstorm.
component that we
El
need to check
Snowstorm
today
es un
is
servidor de
Snowstorm,
terminología FIRE.
which is a fire
Que este
terminology
tiene dos
server,
funciones. Uno es si uno va
which has two
a
roles.
la URL
If
barra
you go
fire,
to the URL
ingresa al API
slash
Fire que
fire
usa.
and you go into
Uno
the
puede
fire
programar con transacciones
API,
Fire
you
esas
can
transacciones.
program using that
Y por
several
otro lado, si uno
transactions.
va
And on the other
al
hand,
barra nomás
if
donde está
you
instalado
go to
el Snowstorm, uno
the
va a hacer el
snowstorm,
navegador de Snowstorm.
you can
Pero
have
tiene como
access to the
el Snowstorm me
browser,
refiero, tiene
and
dentro
you
de su código
have
completo, el nombre
inside
fuente,
the full
el
contents versions of SNOMED. SCT,
SCT
SNOMED is all open source. So that browser is also included, and you can see that you can have access to the local one, but it's a long, complex terminology, which is very difficult to see on a table, and that is why it's there's a browser there. And the SNOMED browser, it's public, you know it, and you can use that locally. Let me see, I can write here browser IHS DO tools, which is the technical name for SNOMED. We have all the countries here, and this is the international version. You would get within the Docker this version, which only has one edition, which is the Spanish International Edition. I think that's what's being used for our demonstration. So you have all of that. Now, what is Snowstorm? It's an open source terminology which is specialized in SNOMED. It's a software that has APIs so that other softwares can have easy access to that terminology. And it's especially useful in more complex terminologies like SNOMED. And Snowstorm has an optimization in the way of storing the data. When you see how SNOMED is distributed, you can see that these are tables with concepts, with relationships. So a table can be easily imported and you can have a certain consultations. But you can easily see that it's so many data, 400,000 concepts, and many segmentation operations in order to use SNOMED. If you want to use specific information, then you can clearly see that with one SQL traditional server, it's not that easy to take advantage of SNOMED. So these servers use optimized versions. Snowstorm uses Elasticsearch, and it basically stores the data, and it allows you to do the search a lot easier. Elasticsearch has advanced consultation capabilities. So when you have a snowstorm, you have two APIs. One is the fire and the other one is the SNOMED API. Here you can see that you can make a search. Let's say asthma. We can do it in Spanish. And then we can see different concepts related to asthma. And if you search them, you can see that there's an API here where the browser makes all of the consultations, all of the questions, all of the queries. This is an API that is specifically for the browser, which is called the SNOMED native API, which has been created for SNOMED, and it's very SNOMED focused. But after that, then there was a standardization that began happening. How can you have access to a terminology server? Just like we do the standardized for clinical documents, this was also done. And this was created, which is the FHIR Terminology API, which is the recommended way for integration. Although the direct native API can be used, the real recommendation is to use this FHIR Terminology API. And this Terminology API, although it's implemented by SNOMED, it can be used for any vocabulary. You can see you can use it with the same endpoints, always with the same parameters, with different values, sure, but the same structure for everybody. And what this actually provides is that you can exchange servers. You can say, we're working with Snowstorm, and then I want to work with that other one and an auto server, which is, from a commercial one from Australia. You can take one out, put another one in. It will and the Snowstorm was going to go and look for it there, and it's going to use the same APIs. It's totally standardized. So you can change the modules, but you can keep the APIs. This API is documented. If you go into the FHIR website, you can see what is FHIR. You can see that it has clinical diagnosis, medication components. All of these are level 4, which is the most clinical level where we have the resources for the real problems, vaccinations, IPS. But in level 2, you can see that we have some of the foundations which provide support to the rest of the FHIR resources. And one of that is precisely terminology. And these levels are connected to the terminology binding, which is the way that the values are defined within a field in a FHIR resource, pointing to the terminology resources. And in the terminology, it's actually quite simple. It's so simple that it's sometimes difficult to follow because it's actually so simple, but it's very compact. Any terminology for FHIR can be defined with these 3 concepts, code
terminología,
systems,
una
value
lista,
set,
o sea,
concept
un
map,
vocabulario entero, como fuera
a whole
ICD-10 o
vocabulary
ICD-11,
for
lo que sea, ¿no? Pero
ICD
es un code
10,
system, un sistema de
11,
codificación.
LOINC. It's a coding system.
Estos
That's
code
what it
systems
is.
tienen versiones.
And these
Tengo
code
versión,
systems have different
tengo de
versions.
SNOMED, tengo la versión
In
internacional, tengo
SNOMED, we have
la
the
versión argentina,
international
son
version, the
6.500, el
Argentinian
NOMED
version.
versión
These
argentina de
are
enero es
two
diferente al
versions.
sistema del NOMED versión
And
argentina.
we have Argentinian from July, Argentinian version from December. It's all the different versions. Then we have the value sets, which are lists of concepts or terms that are used in the implementation practice. So out of 400,000 concepts, we can make a list of 1,000, and those 1,000 are a value set. So for example, all of the nursing activities, all the clinical procedures are value set, which are part of a code system. That is to say, a value set is made up of one or more code systems. And when you define a value set, it could be these 7 concepts are a value set, or we might say this value set is the concept asthma and all of the offsprings. And you can see how many they are if you run it. These more dynamic value sets have an advantage because I can tell you this, but for example, you can run it today and you can get 150 different concepts for asthma, and then 1 year later you can do that again and you can see how many concepts, and it has 160 because there are some new ones that have been added. And that is a dynamic feature, especially for value sets that are defined by rules. And then the other concept, the terminology is a code system, the value set is what I use for the implementation, and then we have the concept match, which is the bond between different terminologies. If we want to go from one to another, what we have is a concept map that allows us to translate from SNOMED to MDA MRAD, for example. In order to use these resources, there are several operations. FIRE has resources and operations. We have, for example, a dollar lookup, a dollar validate code, and a dollar subsumes. These are the 3 ones for the code system. The one that you will mostly use is lookup, which is you receive a code, you want to know what it is, and you look for it in the code system, and it gives you all the details of that code. Validate code, instead of responding with the details, it says if it's true or false, that is to say, valid or not valid. And subsumes has a special meaning for the 3 terminologies. Well, you have these ancestor that's above this offspring, and it tells you whether they are actually connected, linked or not. Is to find out the links between different trees. For example, if we get a diagnosis, is this a cardiovascular disease? And you can ask, or you can say, is this the offspring from the gastrointestinal inflammatory syndrome? It will give you that information. Now, these are not used so much, these code systems, maybe when you are developing, but these are not the most broadly used. It's actually expand and translate. These are the ones that are more broadly used. Validate is used for code system and for value set, but expand is for value set. This is the real search, the real access to the data. Even if you have all the code systems uploaded, it allows you to search one by one. But when you want to look, you will look within a value set. It's a list that represents the code system. Now, a trick is that there is an implicit value set, which is all of the content of the code system. It's an expansion and everything of what's in it. But every time there's a search, it doesn't expand. So when we're here in the browser and you look at all the options and you want to reproduce this in an electronic health record and you're looking for something to code, that's going to be an expansion of a value set, which is the code set of the concepts that are applicable in the health record, and it says a string. So expand is the key operation for coding. And the unique operation for mapping is called translate, because you might think that it's translating the the languages, but it's not. It's translated from one code system to another. It executes a translation and it gives you the next concept map. This is just an introduction, but we will see how it works later on, little by little, in some of the coming sessions with some of the nodes. So let's take a look at the operations in more detail. If we have a fire server and you say, what terminologies have been uploaded, you can get the list of all the code systems available. And the way that Fire works has a very standardized way of being used. You put the name, bar, code system, and you get the list of all the code systems that are loaded. You're going to get a code system for each SNOMED version. And if you want to find a code system in particular to know whether it's a Loing or SNOMED or what version it is, you can look for the title. The title of the code system is subject of the search also. You can also see the value sets that you have and the concept maps that you have in the code systems, value sets and code map. They all have a title that describe them. So let's take a look at the lookup operation. The Fire code has all of this described in detail, and lookup points to the Fire server. It says we have here
una línea creo que es dólar y doble línea de pesos, pero en Argentina se suele decir pesos. Dollar lookup sería
dollar lookup bar. That would be the lookup of trying to find the details of a concept. But that is in this code system, and this is the code. The code systems are identified with a unique identifier. In the past, you may remember HL7 used the OID, which is a language that they used. They had a sequential, very long code, and when you wanted to do something, you needed to ask HL7 to give you a code, and you had to say that. In order to simplify all of that, Fire is no longer uses the OID, and now it's using the URIs. These URLs, which are virtual URLs, and they identify a call system or value sets or concept maps. You can see that there's a whole list of URIs that are for common vocabulary. You can invent your own if you wish. Normally, you put something in the country.gov and slash and the name of the vocabulary. You can invent your own if you want. But I can tell you, this is the code system that SNOMED wants to use. SNOMED.info-sct. That's the official URI of SNOMED. So if there's no new version, what the server will do is to use the default SNOMED version in that server. There's only going to be one in your server, so it's going to work without specifying anything. If you had more than one, then you can add the more details in the URI in order to see what it would look like. So let's look at the value sets. The value sets are subsets of the terminology. This is the code system, and these three concepts is one or several subsets. Three words are used, ref set, subset, and value set, and they're basically the same, just for different audiences that give them different names for different purposes. But a subset, it's a word, it's a concept that is commonly used. Anything that you have as part of a larger set. So this is a SNOMED subset. A ref set is a technical word which is reference set. It's one way of rewording subset. You can add attributes. It's just one way of expressing another type of subset. And within Fire, value set it was used, but they all actually mean the same. Anyway, what are these value sets or subsets used for? In order to reduce the data entry. These are the valid values which come from this value set, and this allows you to have a national strategy. for this diagnosis. We share this value set, and if we all have it, we all know that we're loading that diagnosis. It also allows you, when you send me, for example, in IPS or the vaccination certificate, you need to have values that are part of that value set. It's going to say, this is the terminology and these are the codes. It's going to be very precise in this sense. And also, value sets are used to recover information. When you start with an analysis, you start by creating a value set. And we've seen, for example, I don't know, rheumatic diseases, a research and the use of biological medication. So first you make a value set with all of rheumatic diseases that we're interested. We put that together. This one I want to exclude, this one I want to include. You put all of those diseases that you wanted there, then you go to the medication, and these are the biological medications that I will use. And when you have the two value sets, with that, then you do the data retrieval. That's the mechanism that is used. What does this look like from the FHIR API? There are many different ways to create and to have access to these SNOMED value sets. A native FHIR value set will be identified by a URI. That is to say, we create it and we put it in a compatible server, as if it was a snowstorm, and we can create whatever URI we want for our value set. Example.com / mylist is an URI which is only an identifier. You have total freedom to create them. It's usually with a domain that we have so that people can identify where the value set is coming from. Then there are other ways of looking at the value sets in FHIR, which is a reference to the simple references, SNOMED. SNOMED already has references. If we go here to the Uruguayan version, let's say the reference sets. Here we can see that there is a reference set of LOINC mapping. This is for VMP products, antibiotics, and we can go into the members and we can see that this is a list of different antibiotics. These are reference sets, just like the value sets. And since it's part of the terminology, it's already being loaded. So SNOMED has a trick. You say, if you use as a URI identifying a value set, the SNOMED URI, SNOMED.info SCT, and then you use the module in which that concept is, which would be the Uruguay mode in this particular case, and then we write this here, and including the ref set code. This is an implicit URI. The value set is like a SNOMED ref set, but when we go to the amplifier using this pre-established structure, I can see it as a value set. You don't need to recreate it as a FHIR value set. Everything that is a ref set in SNOMED is in FHIR if you use this FHIR space VS ref set. And there are other tricks here. You say we can have any concept, asthma, let's say, and then you can write this VS equal ISI. When putting these URI by using this ISI operation, it means that it's going to find that concept and all of the offsprings. So it's a trick to put together a value set on the spot. Or actually, what's preferable is to use a SNOMED official query, which is ECL. I don't know if you're acquainted with the SNOMED query language, but you can, a query is the offsprings of. So we can put together the URI that defines the value set by using FHIR VS equal ECL / and then we paste here the code. We can get it. That's all documented in the HL7 in the ECL page here. For example, this is the operation that you want, descendants or the offsprings of asthma. You can
ejecuto,
click here,
esto es un
OK, you're
query.
going to execute. This is a
Sobre ese caso
query.
puedo poner un montón de detalles.
Here we
Puedo,
can have
puedo decir,
many
agregar
details,
otra opción, y
or
que
you
se
can add
compatibilice tal
another
cosa,
operation
o
so
puedo
that
agregar
it's also a
profilement,
descendant
que este
of,
atributo sea
or
igual
another
a esto.
refinement.
Hay un
This
montón de
attribute
restricciones que puedo
has
poner.
got to
Todo un
be equal to
lenguaje
this.
que
So there's a
capaz que me
whole
ayuda
language
para
here
ver todas las operaciones que
that
puedo
where
hacer
you
acá,
can see
como
all
van a
the
tener acá el
operations that
botón
you
que
can
lo lleva
carry out,
a la
or
guía
you're going to have the
del
button
lenguaje de
here
C.
which takes you to the
Entonces es muy
guide,
común que la
to the
implementación
ECL
de
guide. So it's
value
very
sets use
common that
ese
the
lenguaje de C
implementation of
para
value
definir
sets
value sets
use these
condicionales.
ECL
Para
to
eso, en lugar de
define value
personalization,
sets.
tengo con un
And
ID
it's
como
not a
este, que
value
es un
set that we have with an
armado,
ID like this
sino
one
que
here,
lo creo en el
but
momento mismo y
we
después
create that
se
on the spot with
voy a poner
the
excepciones en
query.
general, funciones en general. Entonces, ¿cómo hago para
So
buscar adentro de un
how
refset
can we
usando Fire?
search
Como
within
les
a
comentaba
refset
antes,
with
es solo hacer la
Fire?
operación
This
expand.
is based on the expand operation, as I told you before.
Esto es una operación get.
This is
que se
a
hace
get
sobre el servidor Fire
operation,
barra
which is
value set
done on the
barra
Fire
expand.
server
Tiene
slash
una
value
URL que
set
dice value set.
slash
Hace
expand.
un value set como
This
esta,
is
o la
the value
identifico como
set
myFirebase
or the
SE
ones
de todas
that
las
we have with
propiedades
the
que hay. Le voy a
DSSL.
decir cuál es el
So
lenguaje,
we're going to tell
le
you
digo
what the
cuál
language
función,
is,
el
and
filtro de
then
función
also
que
what the
ejecuta.
filter is, which is the search
Entonces,
sentence.
esto es como lo ejecuta.
So this is the way it
Y por último,
executes
veamos
it.
cómo usamos los
And then
mapeos.
lastly, we can
¿Sí?
see how we
La
do
idea es
the
que los
mapping.
mapeos
The idea is
son
that the
fundamentales para integrar
mappings
SNOMED
are
en cualquier
critical to
sistema.
integrate
Es decir, muchas
SNOMED into
veces
any system.
el sistema usa SNOMED de
Many
forma
times
nativa,
it uses
pero casi todos generalmente
SNOMED
estamos trabajando
natively,
para
but
extraer
even so,
datos para
we need the
estadística, por
mapping to
ejemplo. O sea, en
extract the
general,
data
SNOMED
for
se usa para
statistic
registros
purposes.
clínicos detallados,
SNOMED is
pero
used for
muchas
the
veces tenés que hacer
detailed
un reporte
clinical
de
records, but
CID-10
sometimes
o
we need to
analizar datos
put
en
the
CID-10 o agruparlos, compararlos
ICD-10
entre sectores,
reports. We need
etc.
to compare
Entonces los
with
mapeos muchas veces se
historical
usan para extraer
series.
esa
So
información
mapping is
almacenada.
often used
Y a
to
veces yo ya tengo un
retrieve information
vocabulario
that's
alto
already
para el
coded.
procedimiento,
And
para el
sometimes we
tratamiento, y
already
digo,
have the
bueno,
vocabulary,
no,
let's say for
no voy a usar
medication
SNOMED
or for
directamente, uso los
procedures.
códigos que se
You
llaman
don't
SNOMED,
use
pero
SNOMED, you
cada uno de
use
ellos va a
the
estar
codes that
asociado
you
con
already have, but they're
algunas
associated to a
operaciones.
SNOMED
Tengo este
code. So
código
for some
nativo que usa todo
operations,
el
you have
código
this
SNOMED para
native
poder
code,
compartirlo con
and you
otro
use the SNOMED code
hospital, con
so
otro
that you can
centro,
share
con...
that with other hospital or other
Entonces,
medical centers in the
los
country.
mapeos en SNOMED
So
también
the
se presentan como
mapping in
reference sets, que son
SNOMED
las
are
referencias más
also
complejas.
reference
Este
sets
es un
which are
ejemplo de
more
cómo se
complex.
representan
This is an
mapeos entre
example of
SNOMED y
how the
CDO.
mapping is represented
El
between
reference
SNOMED
ID
and
es el
ICDO.
grupo, el
This is the
conjunto de
refset
mapeos,
ID.
¿sí? Que siempre es el mismo valor.
You can
El
see that it's the
reference
same
comparte
value
ese código
here.
de SNOMED
The
que estás
reference
mapeando y
component
el
is the
target, el
SNOMED
blanco,
code,
es
and then the target
el
is
código de CIDO. CIDO en este caso es la
the
clasificación internacional de oncología.
ICDO, which is
Citado
in this
anteriormente.
case for oncology.
Entonces, en general, eso es un
So
mapeo
in
simple que
general,
ustedes
that's a
van a ver,
simple
pero a
mapping
veces
that
hay
you
mapeos
can see,
complejos o
but sometimes
extendidos. En
there
el
are
caso de
complex
CID-10 es un mapeo
expanded.
extendido. Ese mapeo
For
extendido lo
example,
que busca resolver
ICD-10 is
es que
extended
hay algo que a
and
veces
tries
el
to
mismo
solve the
concepto de
following.
SNOMED mapea
Sometimes the
a
same
diferentes
SNOMED
códigos
concept
de CID-10
maps to
dependiendo de algún
different
factor, como
ICD-10
puede ser el factor
codes
de
depending on
sexo,
several
por ejemplo.
factors. For
Entonces,
example,
el
gender.
código infértil en
So the
SNOMED,
code
si es
infertile,
mujer, mapea
if it's a
N979 y
women,
si es
it's
varón,
N979, and
esto hay
if
formas
it's
de usarlo.
men, it's the other one.
En general, uno puede usar la
In
operación translate. Nosotros
general,
vamos a
the
trabajar los mapeos
translate
simples,
operations can be
en la
used when
Conectaton
working
ejemplo,
with a
sobre todo
simple
usamos los mapeos
mapping.
más comunes
In
que
the
uno usa para
Conectathon,
implementar
you use some of
o
the
para mapear
simplest
un vocabulario que
mappings,
puedas ya tener.
especially for the
Entonces, la
vocabulary
operación
that you're going to be
translate,
using. So the
generalmente que
translate
se hace, se va a get de
operation
base barra
is
concept map.
a get
Si uno pone nada
slash
más, ve todos los mapeos que hay.
base
Y si
slash
no,
concept
dice, bueno,
map,
voy a usar la operación
and you
translate.
can do
Y
the
voy a traducir
translate
este código,
operation
este es
that
el
is
código fuente de
translating this
SNOMED.
code.
Quiero
This is
encontrar
the
a dónde voy.
SNOMED
Entonces digo,
source
el
code,
sistema es
and it
SNOMED.
says the
Va el código
system
este y quiero
is
traducir. La versión de SNOMED es
SNOMED,
esta
sorry.
versión de SNOMED.
This
Siempre
is
que
the
usted ve una
SNOMED
versión y un ID al
version.
final,
Every time that it
es
says
una versión
ID
no
at the end,
con fechas, sino una versión
it's
puntual
with a date and it's a
un
specific
país en particular. Es una extensión de SNOMED,
SNOMED
¿no?
for a specific
Entonces,
country.
tienen la versión. Y
So
tengo
you've got the
target system.
version
Los
there,
target
and then we
systems me
have
dicen a
target
dónde quiero
system,
ir.
which
Voy de
says
SNOMED
where
hacia
we
dónde. En
want
este
to go
caso,
from
hacia Eres.
SNOMED to where.
Entonces,
In this case,
ejecutando esto,
we're
uno puede
executing
encontrar
this, and
la
you can
resolución
find
a lo que
the
hayamos visto. ¿Sí?
resolution to to the question or the
Estas son las
search that we
operaciones que
already
vamos a
started
practicar. No
with.
tienen que hacerlo
And
ahora
this is what we're
inmediatamente.
going to
Vamos a trabajar
practice. You don't
primero
have to do it
en
now,
preparar
of
el
course.
servidor de
We
terminologías
first
y
have to
ver cómo van
prepare
a
the
ser
terminology
los casos de
server
uso, ¿no?
and to see what the
Entonces, bueno, ustedes
case
saben
uses
que
are going to be like.
van a tener una
So you know
representación
that you're
de
going to
casos
have have a
clínicos,
representation
esos
of
casos clínicos
clinical
van a
cases,
diagnósticos,
and there you're going
diagnósticos
to have a
codificados, y en base a todos esos
diagnosis,
casos clínicos
it'll
es una
be coded,
extracción
and there's an
de,
extraction that has
de
taken place
código, ¿no? Es una
for
extracción de
different
código para que es
codes,
la que vamos a usar en el ejemplo.
which is the one that we're
Las
going to be
distintas
using in the
secciones de
example.
los casos
For
clínicos
different sections of the
se almacenan en
clinical
distintas
cases,
partes
we store
de
different
los
parts
recursos FIRE.
of the
Y los
fire
recursos FIRE,
resources,
ustedes van a ver,
and
por
the
ejemplo,
fire
en IPS
resources, for
marcan lo que
example,
se
you will
llama
see
un
that in the
terminology binding.
IPS, we
¿Sí?
have a
Terminology binding es la
terminology binding,
recomendación de cómo se
which is the
rellenan estos
recommendation
valores
on
que
how
doy acá.
these
Uno
values
tiene
are
todos estos que no los
filled.
tengo que
We
poner.
have all of these
Claramente
diagnoses, and
estos,
clearly
estos elementos
these
o
the
conceptos van a distintas
elements,
partes
these
del registro
concepts go
clínico,
to
¿no?
different
El
parts of the
concepto
health
Galapril no va
record.
al mismo lugar donde
So,
va
for
hipertensión
example,
arterial ni radiología de tórax.
enalapril
Va a
does not go in
distintas
the same
secciones
place
del
where
caso
the
clínico. Hay una sección de
chest
medicación, una sección de
X
inmunizaciones, una sección de
X-rays will
patológicos,
be.
alergias,
So there are
etc.
the different
Cada uno de
sections
ellos
here.
tiene
Now,
una
each of
terminología.
them
Y
has
lo que
a
tiene
corresponding
FIRE, que es interesante,
terminology,
es que
and what
permite
FIRE has
convivir con un
is
mundo
that
en el
it
cual hay
allows you
diferentes
to
terminologías. Por eso
coexist
permite
with
acceder a varias
multiple
terminologías al mismo
terminologies,
tiempo,
and that's
mapear
why you can
todo eso.
access
Entonces, los
different types of
distintos campos pueden tener
terminologies
diferentes
simultaneously.
terminologías
Different
asociadas
fields
con
can have
distinta
different
potencia. Eso
terminologies
se llama
associated
strength,
with a
la,
different
la
level
fuerza
of
del binding.
strength,
¿Sí?
which is
Entonces,
how strong the binding actually
uno puede
is.
ver
So
que en
you can
Latinoamérica,
see
cuando
here
se
that
armó
in
el
Latin
perfil
America, when the profile
de
was
los
put
recursos de IPS
together
en
for the
Latinoamérica,
IPS Latin
se
American
establecieron
resource,
estas preferencias.
these
Los
preferences were
establecimientos patológicos tienen
established.
que tener un código de seguimiento y forma
Pathological
preferida.
background has got to
¿Sí?
have
En
preferred
a nivel internacional, la forma
ICD-10
preferida es
code.
el NOMED.
In
Pero en
the
Latinoamérica se
international
usó,
one, it's a
por esos
SNOMED,
dos
but in
códigos
Latin
que
American, it's
pueden estar los dos
ICD-10.
códigos en
But
el
they
mismo
can
lugar y
coexist. They
vamos a
can
mostrarlo
both
ahora.
be in the same
Para
place.
procedimientos, por ejemplo,
For
AISA es igual
procedures,
en Latinoamérica que
well,
en
it's the same
internacional, los dos
thing.
usan SNOMED.
They
Para
both use
condiciones en Latinoamérica se usa
SNOMED.
ICD-10
For
y internacional se usa
conditions,
SNOMED. Y
ICD-10,
hay
and
varios tipos de
international, it's
organizaciones.
SNOMED,
Hay
and so on
inmunizaciones
and so
usadas
forth.
I11,
You can see
aunque hay una versión
immunizations,
de NOMED y hay
ICD-11,
inclusive una
although
opción
there's
de
a
ATC.
SNOMED, and in
Fíjense
fact,
que
there's even an
la
ATC.
fuerza del vínculo
Now,
es
the
diferente, porque
strength of the
preferido
binding
puede ir sobre ella
is
que es
different
requerido, que
because
sigue
this
siendo
one that is
exacta igual o
required,
más.
that is the one that
Preferido
must
es,
be used.
si tenés esta, usa
Preferred
esta, y si
is
no, usa otra.
if you have it, use it.
Y
If not, use another
adicionales,
one.
tal vez por ahí si
An
querés puedes agregar un
additional,
concepto.
maybe you can add
Pero
an
bueno, tenemos
additional
las
concept or
preferencias
something
estas.
like that.
Esto
But
está
this is the
especificado cuando
preferred.
uno ve la
And this
guía,
is
lo ve de esta
specified. When
manera.
you
Está
look at the
haciendo mención,
guide,
por ejemplo, del
that's how
código
it
de la
looks. You
medicación.
have the code
Y acá está
of the
explicado la medicación
medication,
que se
and it's
administró, que
explained
se va a
here. The
administrar, la
medication that was
vinculación que
administered or
está con
was to be
el subset
administered,
de
the
medicación,
binding
el
has
NOMED,
with a
más los
SNOMED
ausentes de
subset
IPS
plus
y
the
estas
absent
preferidas. Y después
unknowns and
tenemos
IPS, and it's
el NOMED
preferred.
FreeSet como
And then
candidato,
we have the free set as
secundario,
a
y
candidate, that's
el ATC
secondary,
de OMS como
and the
candidato secundario. ¿Sí?
ATC
Pero uno
from
tiene cierta escala
WHO,
de
which is a
preferencias.
candidate.
Así es como se
This is
establecen
the
estos
preference
bindings en esta
scale, and
terminología.
that's
Uno ve
how
la
this
guía FIRE,
binding
ve
scale
qué tipo de
is
terminología tiene que
made
usar.
up.
Entonces acá vemos que está un
So
binding
here
primario
we can
y
see
binding
primary
adicionales.
binding
¿Sí?
and then
Y uno
additional
siempre tiene que
bindings.
mirar
And you
la
always have
potencia. En
to
este caso,
look
el
at
binding
the
primario es
strength.
preferido. A veces dice
In this
example, que
case,
quiere decir
primary is
si tenés que
obviously
usar. Pero en este caso
preferred.
no, es preferido. Hay que
Sometimes it
usar
says a
CD10, hay que usar
candidate.
CD11, hay que usar el nombre. Lo que diga
It
el binding, cuando dice
sometimes tell you
preferido,
what you should be
hay
used.
que
When it's
cumplir,
preferred,
¿no?
that's what you
Entonces, si uno
must
hace
follow.
clic en
So
la guía
if you
FIRE, si uno hace
click
clic en lo
on
que
the
dice
fire
Medications
guide on
Absent
this title,
Unknown,
which is
uno se
medication
mete y
absent
acá ve
unknown, you can go in there and you can see
el ref set. Si el ref set
the
dice
ref
que
set, and if it
el
says that
medication del nombre CT
medication
más
of
ausente
SNOMED
desconocido
CT plus absent
implica
and
usar estos dos
unknown
subsets, donde
means that
uno
you
de
need
ellos
to
es el
use this
medication del
subset.
nombre
One
CT,
of them
y
is
cuando uno
the
agarra cómo se
medication
conforma
SNOMED
medication del nombre
CT,
CT,
and when you look
tiene
into
todos los
that,
conceptos que son
you can see
descendientes
that you
de
have all the concepts that are
productos biológicos
descendants from
farmacéuticos y
pharmaceutical
excluye todos
biological
los
products
conceptos
and
que son
excludes
descendientes de
all of
vacunas.
the
Es
concepts
nada más
that
que one
are
function, no tiene que ser
descendants
vacuna.
from vaccination.
Entonces,
So
esto
it
es
only
como dentro
wants
de
to
una
use
guía FIRE,
medications
uno va
and not
navegando y
vaccines.
viendo
And that's how
un
you can
campo en
search that
particular, qué
in a
terminología se
fire
recomienda, con qué
guide
potencia
for a
y
field,
cuáles son los valores
what is the
aceptables. Entonces, como les
terminology,
contaba, las cosas son
what
requeridas.
strength, and what are
Si vos
the
no usás esa
accepted values.
terminología, no sos
If it's
conformante.
required, that's the one
Extensible,
that
tenés que usar
must
la
be used.
terminología, les muestran el
Extensible,
código
you
para
have to
usar esa
use it, and then
terminología.
you can have an additional
Preferido, donde
code
se
within the
dice
value
preferido
it. Preferred speaks for itself, and examples. This is just to depict to show what it does. But the good thing about this is that it gives us certain flexibility to implement certain things. So when you're going to type something, you do that with a coding. And the coding inside has multiple codes. And I know that this is like a tongue twister. It has a codable concept, which has a coding, and it has a coding IPS, and all of this has the own coding system. And basically, this means that when we put a file document together and we want to communicate a condition, this is a fire condition, which is the profile from IPS that you can see here on the left. The code is the codable concept, is part of the structure that's going to tell you the diseases. That's a condition, right? And these conditions, these diseases, allows me to put multiple coding. So there we can add the ICD-10 and the SNOMED code in there. And that creates a document which is easier to be used. So whoever receiving, if they understand ICD-10 or SNOMED, they can use it. We're making their lives easier. So, for example, if I follow the LAC guide, it says that it's preferred to use ICD-10. I can do that, and then I'm complying with that preference. But we can also include SNOMED IPS or SNOMED General or ATC. So we can include that also, which means then that my document is very clear and easily used. How can we include more than one code? It's usually done with a translate. We have the code in the database, and when we are creating it, we use the translate in order to bring that code, and then we include them both. The one that we have saved in my EHR, but also the results from the translate to make it easier for those who consume. So this is the interoperability, the possibility of exchanging information between devices, application, systems to access, exchange, and integrate and cooperatively use data in a coordinated manner. And that's what we were saying. The two main components in interoperability is sending data and also receiving data that can be understood. So let's take a look at the flow of the process when we're sending information. We've seen this already, but we're also going to be seeing when we receive the information. So when we send an IPS, first, in order to build it, we have to map it. There's an allergy field in the IPS. We see where we have the allergies for this patient. We can look at and we put them in the IPS. So that's the first thing that you do. Now, when we are recording this, which code do you use? And that is the mystery that is solved with this part of the terminology. So we look at the bindings. We've seen all of this, and therefore the question is, do I have a code that complies with the primary binding that's been proposed? If the answer is yes, then we can add it. That's good. Now, if we don't have it, we can add it. For this, we need a mapping. For example, we have a diagnosis here, and I have it saved with the national vocabulary. It's something that is totally national and local, and we need to create an IPS, and we cannot send that out because no one's going to understand it. So we do a translate operation with the server, and we say this code that we understand, how is it linked internationally? And that has got to be already stored in the server. So with a reply, then we can add that in the IPS. Once it's been added, then we can say, I've got other standardized codes. Are they part of a national extension? Yeah, because they might be part of the SNOMED national or ICD-10. There are some countries like Australia or Canada that have ICD-10. So if they are part of a national extension, then we need to make some kind of transformation. If not, then they are international and then they can be shared. We can send them directly to the IPS. So that transformation between a national and international code can also be done with a terminology server. Sometimes a mapping when going from national to international is the same vocabulary, and sometimes it's an expansion. Because SNOMED is sometimes sharing a national Argentinian version, let's say, to international, can be done with a QL. There's an SL that says, being all of the ancestral, and we do that, and that gives us the closest international code to that or to your extension. So that's why sometimes it's used expand, which is almost like a translate operation. That's sending. So if we can send things, right? You can send it as it is. You can send it with a translation, with a conversion towards a new version, with a new vocabulary, or with an expansion. Now, when we receive the information, we need to integrate it. We need to be interpreted and be input into our system. So in my system, what we have is preferred code system. For example, SNOMED or ICD-10. So it does have a code. Within the codes that we receive when we get that condition, it has a list of different terminology. Is there one similar to the one that I understand in my system? That's perfect. Then it's ready to import it into a clinical repository. But if not, if the codes that we receive are not the ones that are using our system, then we're going to have to try and find a code that we can map it to. What mapping systems do we have? ICD-10, okay? That's it. And we try to map it like that. When we find a code that can be mapped into a system, we do a translate operation, and with the translation, then it can be sent to the clinical repository. And these that are ready to be sent to the clinical repository go through a clinical user validation by the doctor that try, and basically it helps the doctor. Diabetes mellitus type 2, instead of typing that and recoding it, it does that automatically, and the information doesn't get lost. You can have them, we just click it and it's recorded. So this is the automatic interpretation of the data. Now, if the code is not the one that we use and it's not one that can be mapped, then the only thing that can be done is to present it visually. I present that to the physician, and the physician must manually do the transcription, and he can add that into the clinical repository. But this is the way that we integrate the information that we're receiving with the data that we have in our systems, and how to get the support from validations and lookups to validate these systems, and then we do the necessary translations in order to use the mapping to send those codes into the coding that we use, and then included into the clinical repository, which is recorded in my system. And how do we test all of this within the Conectaton? We know it's complex and ambitious. The idea is what we did last year was from the clinical cases that we were going to check, we extracted the necessary code for the exercise. And we worked on a small set of codes. We said we're going to try all of these techniques, but adjusted to a small set of codes. So when we want to use this in reality, you need more complex mapping, robust terminologies in the country or in a region. Part of that means a robust mapping, SNOMED between SNOMED and ICD-10, and there are some other local terminologies which may have not been mapped up. So we have 5 different value sets. This is background information, diagnosis, vaccinations, allergies, and medications. And all of them have a list of options. If it's the idea was to put 20 in each, but in vaccines, we used 16. I don't know if this will suffer any minor changes, a new diagnosis or a new allergy or a new vaccination. We're going to have to see that.
Pero la idea es que esto es como un vocabulario abstracto.
But this is like abstract vocabulary that will be used. These are codes that nobody really knows. Only the organizers of the Conectaton. We have invented this table. Nobody, this is not information that is known. So the idea is putting tables together where we're going to start linking these diagnoses from the exercise with the local codes, with the ICD codes, and with the SNOMED code. This is similar to what ends up happening in real implementation. So we have different tables so that different terminologies can be implemented. So the code, these are the D Raxel testing codes. L is the local code that you're going to have to use. You will receive these documents and there will be a template that will be shared with you. It has all of these columns from local code to SNOMED. You only have to fill out actually the local code. If you use a local code in your country, you're going to write it down here. You say, how can we tell, I don't know, hypertension, CD34 or whatever. So there you will see that you have the ICD code and the SNOMED code. So you're going to complete this table. And we do this with tables because it's the simplest way for all of us to work together. And then what we're going to have to do is convert these tables into something that can be used in a terminology server. As we have said, we don't want to use SQL databases within the production server. We want to use the FIRE standard. We want to do the dollar translate operation, for example. So what we do is that we convert these mapping tables by using a Python script into a FIRE package, which will include the code systems, value sets, and concept maps. It will include all the necessary FIRE resources in order, will be presented in this table. And that is a TGZ. It's a Linux resource which has a standard. And this package combines resources in order to carry out one single operation. So the Python script creates that concept map with all of the data according to what the table says. And the package is put in Snowstorm, and then Snowstorm has new value sets. If you put a slash value set, well, each of these columns is going to be a value set, a local term, a code system ICD-10, SNOMED. And it will also have the concept map that will allow us to go from local to ICD-10 or from local to SNOMED in any direction. Once you upload this package that was put together, then you can go to the FIRE server. You can carry out a translate operation, the code that you want to translate, the system, which is a SNOMED system, and in the target, we can put the local code. So when you did all of that, that has a field to put the vocabulary URI. So, for example, Argentina.gov, bash, medications. When you do all of that, and that is the identifier for the vocabulary. And it says, if you want a SNOMED, well, it's going to use the mapping based on this table because that created a FIRE resource saying this is equivalent to this, L21, and it gives you out the results. So what are the next steps then? We're going to get together in one more week. The next meeting will be on July the 10th. And in that week, you're going to have to work with the monitors in order to install the country node version so that you can fill out the table with the local codes. Once you have done that, I mean, you don't need to understand all of FIRE. This is just an introduction for you to understand, and also because it's something complex and it's good to see it several times. So the first step is to fill out the tables. And then in workshop 2 on July the 10th is that we're going to work on how to convert those tables into mapping value sets, how to upload that into the terminology server for us to test how they work, how these operations work. We're going to do those operations live, and we're going to see how we can translate the different packages into the different types of vocabulary, which is what you're going to be doing in the Conectaton. So we've got Slack, we're all connected, and as we see this during the week, we can make some progress. So that is today's presentation. Fernando, or the monitors, are you connected?
Sí. No, excelente. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Buenísimo. A ver, ¿puedo hacer una pregunta?
Can I ask a question?
Viéndola.
Yes, but of course.
Dice que ahora algunos países están enfrentando el
Some
tema
countries are
del uso de C11, ¿no? Entonces, por
facing
allí,
ICD,
mi
the use
pregunta
of
era,
ICD
me
11.
mostraste en uno de tus
So the question
slides,
is, you showed that in
que
one of your
podía
slides,
tener el mismo campo como
that it
diferentes
could have the same field,
codificadores.
but
¿Eso
with
es posible?
different coders.
Sí,
Is that
Sí, o sea, yo
possible?
puedo definir un campo. Exacto, eso. Yo podría en cierto campo, exacto, en el diagnóstico, por ejemplo, decir que
Right. For
ese
example, in
campo
the
diagnóstico
diagnosis,
podría o usar el C10 o
you
usar el
could use
C11.
ICD-10 or
Sí,
ICD-11. Yes,
Uno
of
cuando
course.
lo define, cuando uno escribe la guía
Yes,
Fire,
when
uno ve cómo lo
you
escribe acá.
see in the
Ve,
fire
pone
guide, you
los dos
can
como
see here,
preferidos,
and it has
o pone
preferred
uno con mayor
or
preferencia y
one
otro
with a higher
opcional.
preference than the other, and the
Pero
other
en
one is
algún
only
lado de
as
la
optional.
guía uno puede decir
But
que
in
es
the guide, you
deseable
can see
que
that it's
incluya los dos códigos
desirable
en el
to
recurso.
include
Cuando
the
alguien
two
comparte un
codes in the
recurso en la región,
resource.
incluya los dos
So
códigos,
when you
ponga el
share
nombre,
that,
decimos el
that you
C10
could include
o el 3 incluso puede estar,
ICD
claro.
11, 10, and even
O
Snow, but
sea,
all three
sería
of them.
el recurso con los dos códigos,
So it's the resource with the two codes.
el valor del código en dos instancias en algún momento.
Claro, esto es lo que está acá, por ejemplo, en la
Right,
pantalla
this
negra,
is what we have here, the black
está
screen.
el code.
These are
Y el
this is
code
the
se
code,
define con un
and the
coding.
code
El
is
coding es un
defined with a
array, es
coding,
una
and the
lista de códigos
coding,
en realidad.
it's a list
Esto
of
es
codes,
completamente válido
really,
y permitido.
and it's totally
Y
valid
cuando uno
and
evalúa
totally
esto para ver si
permitted.
cumple,
And
lo
when
cumple
you
con el
evaluate that to
perfil,
see whether it
por
complies
ejemplo,
with
va a
the
haber, en este caso,
profile,
como no dice requerido,
in
todos
this
van a
case,
cumplir,
since it
pero
doesn't
como
say
dice preferido, no puede
required,
ser.
they will
Por
all
eso,
comply. But if it's preferred,
con que uno de los dos
I mean,
cumpla con el
even if
requerimiento,
one
el
complies
otro
with the
simplemente es una
requirement,
aclaración,
the other
mayor
one
detalle que uno
is
quiere agregar,
more detail
pero
that is
no hace que
added,
sea inválido,
but
digamos,
it
que
doesn't
es lo
turn
bueno.
it into
Vale.
invalid.
Listo, gracias. No
Excellent,
sé
thank you.
si alguno de los participantes tenga alguna otra inquietud.
Any of the
Algo
participants have
voy a
any
aprovechar
questions, any
Alejandro,
concerns?
pero efectivamente vamos a tener
But yes, we're
un
going
par
to
de
be
sesiones más.
having
Creo
a
que
couple of more
él
sessions
nos
on this.
mostraba las fechas, pero
Alejandro just showed us
si
the
alguien
date.
quiere también.
So if anybody wants,
Exactamente, la otra sería la siguiente semana a la misma hora y
the
la
next one
próxima
is next week, and
probablemente
then the
el fin de
next
mes,
one
31, ¿no?
on the
Sí, 31 de
31st.
julio,
Pero
el
eso,
fin de mes.
¿alguna inquietud? ¿Algo que quieran compartirnos? ¿Alguna lección aprendida de algunos de ustedes
Any
que
lesson that you may have
estuvieron en
learned,
el Conectaton de
for you who were in the
2024?
Conectaton in 20,
¿Algo que quieran
24?
compartir?
Hay un comentario en el chat. Ahí Adolfo
Dale.
There's a
dice,
comment
¿podría
in
ver
the
el slide de
chat.
comparación del ecosistema IPS LAC e IPS internacional? Este slide que yo puse acá era para comparar.
Okay, let's see. This
No era para comparar sino era para contar que es totalmente válido que los perfiles
this is
cambian un
just to
poco las
show that it's
preferencias,
totally
sobre todo cuando
valid
es
that
algo
the
de
profiles
preferencia, ¿no?
changes the
Si algo es
preferences.
requerido en uno
If something is
de los perfiles, en
required,
realidad uno no puede hacer un perfil que lo refina y lo contradiga, porque si no, no serían compatibles.
you cannot
Porque cuando
have
los perfiles se
a
manejan con
profile
preferencias de
that contradicts.
codificación,
But when it has a
uno cuando lo utiliza
preference,
puede ir cambiando esas preferencias.
you can
Y el
change them.
hecho de ver que hay tantas preferencias
And
posibles
looking at that, there are
es
so
lo que
many
te
possible
permite
preferences.
decir, bueno,
Is precisely what
todo
allows
es
you
preferido
to
de acuerdo al
say that
contexto. Trato de
if
ponerlo todo, por
everything is
ejemplo, trato de
preferred,
facilitar.
then you can use either.
Bueno, parece complejo, pero creo que
It
de a
seems
poco y de la
complex,
mano de los monitores que los van orientando y todo, ya pasamos por todo esto el año pasado,
but
así
we've
que
already gone through this
todos entendemos un poco cómo
last
llevarlo a
year.
cabo, así que me parece que de a poquito van a ir construyendo este nodo, que me parece como está bueno siempre, creo, con la forma que está planeada
I think it's actually
todo el
quite good the way
ejercicio
that
de la autopista, en el
the
sentido de,
Conectaton has been put
con
together.
con un ejemplo muy chiquito, van haciendo lo mismo
So
que después
with a
esto lo puedo
very
seguir
simple
un nivel mayor.
example,
Obviamente que es un grado de complejidad. O sea, uno dice, yo puedo crear
I mean, obviously we're going to have
algo
different levels
fácilmente
of complexity.
en un Excel, pero cuando quiero hacerlo en la
You
realidad y
can
tengo
do the
un
mapping
código
in
que
an Excel
mapear,
sheet, but
no es
when
lo
you
mismo,
have to
digamos,
do
tengo
it with
necesito un
5,000
especial para
codes,
eso.
we
Obvio,
require
es más
specific
complejo hacerlo en la realidad.
software.
Pero
Obviously,
por
it's
lo
a lot
menos los
more
mecanismos
complicated,
y
but
las
at
teorías se
least the
pueden probar
mechanisms and the
y identificar.
theories
Y
can
otra
can be.
pregunta de pronto, ¿cómo
Sorry, I
mirarías
have another
tú?
question. How would
Por
you?
suerte, la mayor parte, digamos, de los países, pues se habla hispana. Sin
Most
embargo,
of the countries are
tenemos
Spanish
algunos
speaking,
países,
yet we do have some
digamos, Brasil, ¿cierto? Y algunos
countries like
incluso participantes de la
Brazil and
Conectaton,
even some participants in the
incluso
Connectathon
de idioma
that
francés o
speak
Dutch,
French
¿cierto?
Sí,
Entonces, en
or
algún momento,
Dutch.
¿cómo podrían usarse
So
estos recursos
how
para que no
can these
solamente
resources be used
haga el
so that
translate
it not only does the translate in
del código local, sino que
from the
también poder
local
empezar a
code, but
trabajar con el tema de
also
las traducciones,
to work
las descripciones?
with
¿Cómo mirarías allí el uso de los
acá,
descriptions
recursos
of
para
the other languages?
tal cual, es
It's
el
here.
lookup. O sea,
It's the
si yo
lookup.
recibo un código,
If we get
leo el
a
código, pero no
code,
entiendo la
we can see
descripción,
that I don't
yo
understand the
le hago un
description,
lookup en mi
then we
versión.
do the lookup in
Si
our
en mi
version,
versión de CIE 10
in
de mi
the
país
ICD-10
o
version
en mi
in my
versión de SNOMED
country,
de mi país.
or in
Cuando hago el
SNOMED in
lookup,
my
lo
country.
vuelvo a
When we do
traer
the
usando el
lookup,
código nada más,
then we
vuelvo a
bring
traer
it
todos los
only
detalles de los
using the
conceptos de
code.
mi
We
base de
bring
datos, de mi
all the
servidor
concepts
también.
from my database, from
Entonces,
my
de esa forma yo lo
terminology
voy a ver
server.
en mi lenguaje
So
nativo.
with that, we
Está
can see
bueno
that in the native
claro.
language. That's a very good example.
En algún momento probablemente hagamos esa prueba también para
Yes, we can
algunos
maybe do
estudiantes
that
que
test too.
Sí, sí,
Yes,
sí,
sure.
totalmente.
Yes, absolutely.
Bien, gracias, Salo.
Thank you.
Bien, ¿alguien
Very
más
well.
está por allí con alguna inquietud?
Any
De todas
additional
formas,
questions?
ya nos diste bastante
You have given
input.
us a
Muchísimas gracias.
lot of
Seguramente
input.
nos quedan
Thank you
varias
so
ideas por
much.
allí.
Most surely
Y
we
bueno,
will
también
get
está
some
abierto el Slack
additional questions,
para
but
quienes
the
quieran
Slack is
también
always
hacer algunas reflexiones
open
luego
if you want
y
any
nos vemos
additional reflections,
en
and
las
we will
siguientes
see you
sesiones.
in the next
Alejandro,
sessions.
muchísimas gracias también
Thank you so much, Alejandro,
por tu participación y
for
como siempre
your
por tu
participation
excelente
and for
eh,
your
voluntad para apoyar estos
willingness
webinars y
to
también
help
pues
us in these
con la
webinars.
intención de contar contigo en El
And
Salvador, ¿no?
it's wonderful that we will also see you in El
Muchas
Salvador.
gracias a todos y nos vemos en el
No,
Slack.
thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Así será.
También estoy en el Slack.
Listo.
Sí.
And I'm
Siempre
also in
estamos
Slack,
chequeando el
by
Slack
the
para
way.
responder también dudas.
Genial. Bueno,
Great.
buenas tardes a todos.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Goodbye.
Que estén bien. Gracias a
Bye-bye.
todos. Chao, chao.
Saludos.